Hello and welcome to webinar number 2. So we're in Tuesday now. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's webinar. I hope it was really useful for you and you got some really good tips from it. We've set up a Facebook page for this series of webinars. You should have access to that Facebook page. You should have a link to it in some of the emails that we've sent out. So what I would suggest is if you go up to that Facebook page and you like that page, you can jump into that page and ask us questions about any of the webinars that we're putting out. It's probably a quicker way of getting a response from us, getting a more immediate response as you're watching the webinar. So that might be a really good idea. And that's the whole reason that we set up that page. So jump over there, click on one of the links in the emails that we've sent out, jump over to Facebook. And if you've got any questions about anything that we're talking about, we'll put them in there. We'll also put links for everything that we're talking about in those in that group as well. So you should be able to access all of the things that we're talking about, whether within the webinar or outside of the webinar, very, very easily. So without further ado, let's press on with Tuesday's content, which is all about commercial to residential. So commercial conversions is what we're going to talk about today. And what we're looking at doing is we're looking at creating leads for you. We're looking at creating these property leads for you. Now, yesterday, from the two strategies that we used, which was A, targeting below market value, and B, targeting the title splits, we should have produced, on a city about the size of Leeds, we'll have produced upwards of 40 leads from the existing stock that was in the market. So if you're in a city or you're targeting a city that's a comparable size, you know, we've already produced a huge amount of leads for you. Now we're going to focus on a completely different strategy today, which is going to produce even more leads. Now again, we can talk about this commercial conversion strategy because we access it in a number of ways. A, we've got the franchisees who are going out there and doing commercial conversions. Funnily enough, just 2 days ago, today's Tuesday, Friday of last week, we exchanged on a property, which is a commercial conversion. Yesterday, Monday, we exchanged on a property, which is a commercial conversion. So we've got quite a few of these going on at the moment. So it sits very nicely in our franchise section because it's a strategy used by the franchisees. The developments that we've got as well, obviously we're looking at big developments that we can do here at HQ. Now, you know of the 585 flats that we're building in Manchester. I mentioned them yesterday. The next project in that pipeline is a 34 unit commercial conversion. And then after that, we've got about 200 units, which we're going to build as new in Liverpool. So even for ourselves, we're looking at doing these commercial conversions because they can be very, very lucrative. So let's get into exactly why. So yesterday, secrets of online sourcing, today commercial conversions, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about direct to vendor leads. So just to show you that we're keeping nicely on track, sticking with the plan. So commercial conversions, you know, before 2015, they weren't really a thing. They certainly weren't as popular as they are now. They certainly weren't as talked about as they are now. And why is that? What has happened? In most cases, before 2015, you'd have needed planning permission to convert a commercial or an industrial building to a residential building. And as soon as you incorporate planning permission into any kind of deal, it adds time and it adds expense. And if what you're looking for is creating the best return on your money that you can in comparison to other investment classes, such as pensions, wind farms, solar, whatever it might be, if you're looking at comparisons, then time and expense are two things that you really don't want to involve if you don't need to. And so commercial conversions really weren't pursued as much as they are now. So if you were paying for planning and you're paying for building regs and cost, the post-building inspections and surveyors, it can add quite a lot of cost. And that's if you get planning. The whole issue with planning and why most people are turned off by planning is just the risk. You know, what if they say no? And what if you have to go to appeal and then it's more time and it's more expense and it's handing your control of your project onto somebody else? And so historically, commercial conversions have been avoided in favour of more safe investment. But in October 2015, a temporary planning change was made permanent, which meant that a B1A office could be converted into a C3 dwelling house under permitted development. You can also convert a B1C, which is a light industrial building, but that isn't used quite as much because a light industrial building doesn't lend itself to being converted into a dwelling quite as easily as a B1A office. But that is that's the geekery that we're going down to at the moment. So we've got the actual planning use code, which is a B1A office into a C3 dwelling house. So that was made permanent. And what that meant was, across the country, unless opted out of, you could now find any B1A office and convert it into a series of flats, a house, whatever it lent itself to, without that need to go through planning. You now had certainty that you didn't have any additional cost, any time issues, and no risk factor in terms of actually being able to convert that building. So since 2015, since that regulation change, 1 in 10 new homes is now a former office, just to give you an idea as to the scale of how this has been adopted. Since 2015, 30,545 offices have been converted to flats without the necessity of going through planning. Huge amount, and that's not done by one person, obviously. But if it was, that would be a huge amount of money that they'd have saved by not having to go through planning for those 30,545 offices. And not only in terms of money, but in terms of time as well. They've saved years and years and years of delays and wait, having to wait for those units to go through planning and get planning approval. And in some parts of the country, commercial conversions are responsible for 2/3 of all the new housing stock. Again, an absolutely astronomical number have been converted. Current value of commercial property in the UK, something like 683 billion. So if you were going to take that and convert it into commercial, you'd probably get some kind of uplift, which is what we're going to talk about in a little while. So that 683 billion, if you're going to say add 20% to that, is in terms of the uplift that you'd be expecting. You're talking about billions. You're talking about a huge amount of money that's potentially still locked up within commercial buildings, which could be released once it's converted to residential. So planning, here are the use classes, just to confirm that we are now allowed to take B1A office or commercial conversions of B1A or B1C and convert it into C3. Now this document is very small, which is why I have included the link at the bottom for you to find that document. But this is a terrific document. On the left-hand side, it tells you what the current use class is, and then it's got a description through the middle. And on the right, it tells you of all of the permitted changes that are available. So for an A1 shop, I can just read it up here. You might not be able to, so I'll talk you through it. For an A1 shop, you're allowed to convert it into, say, an A2 of up to 2 flats as a temporary change for 2 years. So it tells you the real detail of what is allowed under permitted change. So to find what we're talking about, a B1 business, and you've got A, B, and C, and you can turn a B1A into C3 residential. It's the second line just up there. So what does this change mean? This means that very large buildings, which are usually within sort of residential areas, or certainly close to residential areas, can now be turned into residential without having to go through that risk of planning fail. Now, there is an opportunity here as well, because if you know about the way that buildings are financed, especially commercial buildings are financed, they tend to generate their value based on what income they're producing. So an office building in a certain area might be valued by a surveyor at a 10 times multiple. Now that depends on the building itself and it depends on the area, but that's what the surveyor would come up with. Let's say it's going to be a 10 times multiple, and I'm picking that number purely because it's easy for me to do the maths. It might be a 6, a 7, an 8, an 11. The biggest that I've seen is a 12.5 times multiple that a surveyor used on a building. But what they'll do is they'll find out what the gross rent generated by that building is, and then they'll use that multiple to determine what the value of the building is. So let's say, again, I'm going to use easy maths here. So let's say that the rent generated from that building, the gross rent per year is £100,000. So on a 10 times multiple, that building is going to be worth £1 million. That makes sense, right? Easy to do. However, what happens if that building's empty? Because now you don't have an income from that building in order to multiply. So what do? Well, then you have to fall back on the bricks and mortar value. Now, if a building had been occupied for £100,000 worth of rent and achieved a 10 times multiple, and it would have generated £1 million survey figure, if the building's now empty and that building would now be valued at something like, as a bricks and mortar valuation, £300,000, you've just got a huge discount from what you potentially could have bought that building for. So empty commercial spaces, which are going to be valued as bricks and mortar, really produce a huge opportunity for you to then make a lot of money out of the conversion. So what could stop the development? Now, I'm sure you've heard of Article 4, and you might be thinking, but what are you talking about Article 4 for? We're talking about commercial conversions. Well, Article 4 is a much misunderstood clause, and I'm going to explain exactly what it means. Most people don't understand it, hence the question marks. But Article 4 is the removal of a permitted development right. So right now, under permitted development, you're allowed to change a B1A or a B1C building into a C3 dwelling. That's what you're allowed to do, and that's a permitted development. Much the same as you can build an extension in your garden up to a certain size, so long as it's away from the boundaries, up to a certain size, you're allowed that under a permitted development, which means you don't have to go through planning. Now, if that permitted development is removed, that means that you have to go through planning. So say in conservation areas, you might have Article 4 in that conservation area to remove your ability to add a conservatory or add an extension to the back of your house. That's an Article 4 area, and it refers specifically to the removal of that permitted development. Now, what we're talking about here is B1A or B1C, offices to C3. And an Article 4 can be introduced into an area which removes your right to do that, to make that change under permitted development. So if you have Article 4 in your area, in most cases, it's probably going to talk about HMO. But that's a level of detail that you need to check to make sure that that Article 4 area refers to HMO, or it refers to commercial conversions, or it refers to any other permitted development out there. Article 4 means the removal of a permitted development right. You then need to check exactly which permitted development right that Article 4 refers to. So because we have a permitted development of B1A or B1C to C3 residential, that means that it could be subject to Article 4. And some areas have Article 4 referring to commercial in them. So that's a level of detail that you need to check first and foremost, because if it has got Article 4 in the area, it means that you need to go through planning, which all of a sudden we've taken back that risk, we've taken back that cost, and we've taken back that length of time that we need to put into that, getting that through in order to take advantage of it. So we've had a look in our area. We know that it hasn't got Article 4. That's fantastic. We know that we are able to do this under permitted development, so that's great. We've checked the use class of the building, of any buildings. We know where to check the use class of the buildings. So you can check whether it's a B1A or B1C and convert it into a C3. Now, where do you look for these commercial conversion deals? So here we quickly brainstormed 26 opportunities, 26 different ways to search for commercial. Now, the top one that we've got there is Rightmove. And yesterday, on Monday, we went to Rightmove straight away in order to search for residential properties. to then make an uplift from. Now today, we don't have that one website like we do for residential that has 80, 85, 90% of all of the commercial opportunities on it. Rightmove contains most of the opportunities for residential. We don't have a commercial alternative. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to source our commercial opportunities from a number of different sources. And here are 26. So these 26 are all national commercial agents who are based online. Rightmove, as you can see, is one of them. But if you click on the commercial section of Rightmove, and then you search on all of these other places that I've listed for you, you'll see that there's a huge amount of commercial opportunity that is not on Rightmove. So don't by any means think that Rightmove has the commercial side sewn up like it does the residential side. It's far from it. And what you'll see is, although all of these that I've listed for you are national opportunities, they are still quite geographically based. So one of them might be very strong on stock that it's got in the Northwest. Another one might be very strong on stock that it's got in London, but not really have much in other parts of the country, but still class themselves as being a national provider. So therefore, what you'd have to do at this stage is you'd have to go through each and every one of these 26 that I've listed and find out whether it has a good presence in your location. Now, there's no quick way to do that, I'm afraid. You're going to have to go into it. You're going to have to search in your location. You're going to have a look through specifically searching out offices, because what most of these companies do is they separate out into industrial or commercial or offices and a number of other categories as well. But if you search for offices, then you know you're going to filter out the ones that will definitely require planning permission, leaving you the ones that don't require planning permission, and that much easier conversion process. So once you've identified which ones are good for your area, then I would suggest that you use them, you make a note of them, and you continue to go back to them in order to search for your commercial property. Now, some of them are pretty sophisticated. Some of them have very similar search functions to Rightmove. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to set up an email alert. So you're alerted every time that a new property of the description that you're looking for is listed on one of these sites. Saves you a huge amount of time, and you don't have to keep going back to that site because it drops into your inbox. And that's the best way to do searching or to do sourcing when somebody delivers the property to you rather than you going out there and finding it yourself. So these 26 I'm going to leave you with. I'm going to leave you with, and I want to see what you come back with and which ones work in your area. So once you're set up, then what do? Well, exactly the same as residential, because commercial or residential, it doesn't matter. You use the property as icebreakers. It's all about, exactly like we talked about yesterday, it's all about the human contact and then your consistency with that human contact. So if you can find somebody who sources commercial property or a provider of commercial property in your area, make sure that they know who you are. Make sure that they know that you're serious about purchasing commercial property or sourcing commercial property for investors. So now what we're going to look at is doing the numbers. So we've looked at where to find commercial property. We looked at how to find commercial property and going through that list in order to see what works in your area and what doesn't work in your area, and concentrating obviously on the ones that do. So now with the commercial property, how do you work out whether it works or not? How do you go through the numbers to find the deals that work and stop paying attention to the deals that don't work? Well, this is a new build square meterage chart. So if you've got a commercial property, let's say it's offices, and what you're thinking of doing is converting that commercial property into 10 flats, splitting the title of those flats and selling the flats individually. Now, let's say you bought that property for, we'll use the example that we talked about before. Let's say you bought that property for £300,000, and you can split it into 10 flats, and each one of those flats would be worth £80,000. That means that you're going to buy it for 300,000. You have to pay for the conversion, and at the end it's going to be worth 800,000. Now let's say that conversion costs £200,000. So your total in is 500,000. You're selling for 800,000, which means your profit margin is somewhere around £300,000. But how do you know how many flats you can fit into a building? Well, fortunately, most commercial is listed as per square meter or per square foot. And so long as you've got that floor plan meterage, you can work out how many units you can fit in there. And I'm going to, this chart is obviously for your benefit. So let's have a look at how to use it. So 1-story dwellings, which is what most flats are. So let's concentrate on this column here. 1-story dwellings, a 1-bedroom, which is a double bedroom, is 50 square meters. 1-story dwelling, again, 2 bedrooms, of which both of them are doubles, is 70 square meters, or 1 double and 1 single is 61 square meters. Now, these are just a guide because these are new build size guidelines. You will get a little bit of leeway on commercial conversions because it's a conversion of an older property. So we tend to use 50 for a 1-bedroom or 1 double bedroom and 61 as a 2-bedroom size guide. So how does it work? So I found a property and it was 536 square meters over 4 floors. Now what that equals to is 134 square meters per floor, because on the footprint, all the floors were exactly the same size. So the first thing that you need to do is take off 20% per floor, which means that 134 goes down to 107.2 square meters of habitable area per floor. Now, why are you taking off 20% per floor? Because in flats, you need to take into consideration the corridors and the hallways and the staircases leading from one flat to another. So you take off 20% as a rule of thumb, and then you look at 107.2 as your habitable floor area. Look at the area stats on property data for the costs, and you know that 107.2 square meters per floor means that a studio, so let's just nip back quickly to see what a studio would be, because we didn't mention that. Studio is 39. So 1 bedroom, 1 person, 39 square meters. So you'd fit 3.35 studios per floor, which means that would be, obviously you can't fit 0.35 of a studio. So that would be 3 times 80, which is 240. So you could make £240,000 from selling those units on at the end if you were going to concentrate on studios. For a 1-bed property, you could fit 2.3 per floor, so that's going to be 2. And using property data again to work out the cost of a 1-bed, that means they come through in that area at 97, which means that you'd be making £194,000 per floor, which obviously isn't as good as the studios. If you were going to concentrate on 2 beds, you could only fit 1 per floor, which means the 2 beds sell for 147, which means that each floor would be worth £147,000. However, what you can do is you don't need to commit to any one of those exits. You can use a combination. So you could do 2 studios and 1 bed, which would use 110 square meters. Now that would generate £257,000 per floor, which is, as you can see, the best GDV. And over 4 floors, it means that property is now worth 1.028 million. Now, like I said, you have a little bit of leeway when you're doing a conversion instead of doing a new build. And therefore, what you would do is you would take that plan to an architect and you would ask them to draw up the plan to separate the flats out. So it made up 2 studios and 1 bed, and you'd ask their advice as to whether it would work and whether that would pass building regs. You can then take those plans to building regs and ask them their opinion as to whether they think that that's an achievable concept. None of that. You should be able to get that advice for free. So we're still not entering into, going down the planning route and it costing a fortune and taking you too much time. So how do you calculate how much it's going to cost to do that conversion work? So roughly, we work on £25,000 per unit to do the conversion, and that's from sort of a normal office kind of environment to putting up walls, putting in kitchens, putting in bathrooms, doing all the plumbing, and then, as it says in the next bit, splitting the utilities. Because obviously, if you're going to do a title split, and each flat is responsible for its own bills, you also need to split the utilities. Now, that can be quite an expensive process. The way that we work out whether that's going to affect our profit margin is we put aside £1,000 per utility per unit to cover those costs. There are, of course, VAT rules on commercial conversions as well. So instead of paying 20% on your VAT, you should be paying 5% on your VAT, which means that you should, at the point of being charged by your builder who's doing that conversion, your builder should charge you 5% instead of charging you 20%. You've just made a 15% saving on your costs, which is great news. Now, the not so great news is that if your builder doesn't charge you 5% and they charge you 20%, your chance of getting that money out of HMRC is not great. So you need to make sure that you're on top of and in front of all of these costs and all of this regulation before you start to commit to anything. Because I'd rather be pre-aware, and I'd rather plan for something like that rather than trying to get money out of HMRC, because I know which one's going to work better. And what's the 15%? What does that mean on a £500,000 conversion? That could be worth anything up to £75,000. And I would much rather having that £75,000 in my pocket rather than having accidentally given it to HMRC and trying to get it out of them. So what do you do when you identify good prospects? When you've been through those websites and you've had a look at the prospects, what do? You do your due diligence. And like I talked about yesterday, we have a webinar all about due diligence. If I cover due diligence here, it would take an hour on its own. So the 4 stages of due diligence are overview, red flags, numbers, and certainty. And if you go over to YouTube and you type in sourced, we've got our own channel. You can find that webinar, and you can. It's also worthwhile you subscribing to the source channel while you're there, because we're going to be putting lots of videos on there, all free, all for your benefit very soon. So if it works, what do you use to make a deal happen? Like we talked about yesterday, it's contracts and it's finance. A combination of those 2 things will make your deal happen. So if you want to learn about anything, I would learn about what the different contracts are, what they mean and how you can use them, and what the different finance options are, what they are and how you can use them. These are the options. The first thing I would do if I were you would be to work out or to find out what the average loan to value and what the lending criteria are for all of these different categories, because the combination and the way that they differ gives you the power to apply them in different situations to reduce the amount of money that you need to put into deals. Contracts, again, we've got all of these contracts which are available to you, or all of the ways of using contracts that are available to you. And again, depending on the situation, depending on where the vendor is and what the vendor's motivation is, you can use any one of these or a combination of these in order to make your deal go through. So we have franchisees who search for this kind of stuff all of the time. Like I said, we exchanged on Friday, we exchanged yesterday on 2 deals, which were commercial conversions. There's a huge amount of stuff out there. There's a huge amount of effort and work that you need to go through now as well, because in your due diligence for commercial conversions, it's not just like working out whether a refurb opportunity is going to work, because you've got the purchase price and you then work out the GDV. And all you're doing is working out the margin. In order to work out what your margin is for a commercial conversion, it takes you more time. There's more maths to go through. There's more effort to get into in order to work out whether these deals work. We have 50 offices nationwide and exclusive lending. We put events on. We talked about them yesterday. I'm not going to go through them again. We've got a huge amount of development experience. We've got our 5-day training course. And on the 5-day training course, we've had people searching for commercial conversions, finding them, that are now buying those conversions or going through those conversions right now. So this is property training that actually works. This is what we do. We're not interested in just putting bums on seats and doing training courses. We're interested in people actually doing property deals. That's what we do here. Now, again, I've thrown a lot of information at you. You might need to watch this webinar, certainly listen to the audio a couple of times, because to get the hang of going through and doing those, working out whether a commercial conversion works and doing it quickly is quite a skill. Again, like we talked about yesterday, I want you to focus on efficiency and getting through that process quickly, but doing it well. And I want you to get to the point with every single deal that you look at where you can be quite black and white about it. And you can look at that deal, you can assess whether it works quickly, and you can either put it in the pile of things to do further due diligence on, or you can put it in the pile that you're not going to look at any further. The quicker you can get to that point where you're absolutely certain about your decisions, the better. And the easier to get to that point is all about repetition and going through that process and working it out. So again, have a look at our Facebook group. You should have a link to it. Go in there if you've got any questions. I'm on Facebook most of the time. I've posted a couple of times today, and I do on most days. So I'm in Facebook fairly regularly. So if you've got any questions, put them in there. I'll get the notification and I'll be able to come in and answer your question. Otherwise, my email address is there and you can send me an email. One of the other reasons that I prefer to do it on Facebook is if you've got a question, 10 other people will probably be thinking of that question. And so if I answer your question, 10 other people can benefit from that. So go into that Facebook group. Let's get a bit of engagement about what's going on these training courses. And if you've got any questions about anything, please put them in there. Been a pleasure to talk to you today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of Tuesday, and I will see you tomorrow for day number 3 and direct to vendor leads, and how do we generate direct to vendor leads and what are the best ways to use those leads. So I look forward to that. Thanks very much for your company today, and I will speak to you soon.